Hey, everybody. We are continuing with this low budget enterprise here where I am sitting, I guess, sort of in my kitchen, late, tired, no good sound setup or anything. Hopefully, that's going to change pretty soon. I will be rearranging things so that I will not have a ridiculous background in the future. I have now I have an arm to set up for my microphone. I still haven't done it. I am swamped with work. So as soon as I get to that, I will. But so hopefully fairly soon, and by soon I don't mean 6 months from now. I mean like in the next month or 2 months at most, things will start improving around here. We'll have better lighting, better audio. I don't have a new camera yet, but I mean this one's not terrible. But I'd like to get another one eventually. I'll get around to it. Maybe maybe around. Great, that's a great way to start. Just start coughing. Uh, that's just how it goes sometimes. Maybe around Christmas I could pop in a new camera, and then we really should be ready to go. Things will be working pretty well here. I did get some lighting, but I also haven't set that up yet. So I got a few things to get this up going. Anyway, so we are back on the project of continuing to review every video on YouTube on metaethics. But today I'm not reviewing. I mean, I might get to a video if I get through some blogs. I wanted to talk a bit about Substack because I've noticed that a lot of the people, there's occasionally a little crossover of people I encounter over on Substack and people I encounter here on YouTube, but there's not a lot of crosstalk between the two. So I want to encourage that crosstalk. If you're over here on YouTube, which you are if you're seeing this, and you're not on Substack, go check out Substack. In fact, let me just put a link directly to my blog right in the chat. I haven't posted anything in a couple weeks. Normally, I'm pretty consistent. I have more stuff on the way. What is with the coughing? I wasn't coughing the whole day until I go live. All right. And you may have noticed I did a stream on Friday. I did a stream on, was it yesterday or the day before? I don't know. When was that? I can't even keep track anymore. I think it was yesterday. Was it yesterday? I got to check. I got to know what day it is. Wow. Let's see. What day was it? It was yesterday. Okay, that's good. But so yeah, I didn't stream for a couple weeks. Now I'm back with a vengeance. Lots of streaming, lots of covering all the meta ethics. So if you're new to the channel or you're not new to the channel, whatever, I'm going to say it anyway. Hey, I don't typically introduce myself. My name is Lance Bush. I am a philosopher and psychologist. I might as well just talk about background. PhD in psychology, master's in philosophy. I did undergrad in both. So I work in philosophy and psychology. In particular, I work at the intersection of the two, where my primary area of specialization, it's what I did my dissertation on, is the psychology of metaethics. So a lot of my research ended up looking at how do people that don't have formal training in metaethics, which is a branch of ethics that deals with abstract questions about the nature of morality, how do people without formal training in philosophy think about those questions? And in particular, I looked at the measures, the methods used to assess people's beliefs about moral realism and anti-realism. So moral realism is the view that there are stance-independent moral facts. That is the view that there are facts about what's morally right or wrong or good or bad that are true independent of the values of individuals or cultures or anything like that. They're true, like they're out there. It's not made true by our attitudes or preferences. And anti-realism is simply the negation of that. Sometimes it holds that there are stance-dependent truths, that there are moral truths, but they're made true by our attitudes or preferences, or the standards of our culture. Sometimes there's other sorts of views. Not going to get into all of those today. If you don't already know this stuff, you could Google it. You could, I don't have like tutorial videos where I go over the stuff. Sometimes it comes up and I mention them. But basically, that's what my work is all about. Basically, the psychology of how people think about those questions. So I also debate the questions themselves, like on philosophical grounds. So I don't just look at, hey, what do people think about these questions? I also take a stance, and my stance is anti-realism. I endorse a rather unconventional form of anti-realism. It doesn't even have a name. There's not really anybody in my camp. There's complicated reasons why I've addressed in other videos and on my blog. So you could go check that out too. There's links in the descriptions to this if you're not already familiar. Most of you probably are. I think probably most of you are return viewers, but in case there's new viewers, go check that stuff out. So basically what I do on MetaMonday is it's like Metaethics Monday. This is a day where I have set aside to review other people's commentary, whether it be debates or interviews or discussions on metaethics. And so far, this is the 12th one. that's always been reviews of other YouTube videos. But today I want to show you some stuff that's going on over on Substack, especially because paradoxically, I haven't been posting as many blog posts, but I've been more active on there, and I'll talk a bit about that. But let me say hi to everybody. And I haven't given Lance Loot out recently, and I was just thinking that, and now I see this. So Anthony here gets 1,000 Lance Loot. Sapir gets 500 Lance Loot, and Tony D3, you'll get 250 Lance Loot. That's how we'll do it. So giving out the Lance Loot, you may be wondering, what can I purchase at Lance Loot, especially people that are new here? Nothing. It's a currency, but there's nothing to exchange it for. Maybe someday there will be, but there's not right now. But you get the Lance Loot. I was inspired by Nathan Ormond over in Digital Gnosis with, I think it's Nathan Nichols. I wonder how many Nathan Nichols I have. I don't know if they decline over time. Like if you don't use them, you lose them. But yeah. Oh, let me pin this. Oh, that's not going to work. One second. I just want to pin the link to the Substack. 1 second. So that'll be easy to find. There. Now it is pinned, and it should be easy for you to find it. So yeah, go check out the Substack. I'm about to hit 500 subscribers over there, so it's way behind my subscribers here. I haven't seen a lot of growth in either places. You know, I don't think doing reviews of metaethics videos and occasionally talking to people about experimental philosophy and meta science and a couple other things gets you pushed up in the algorithm much, especially with this low budget, thing that I got going on. But we'll get it fixed up. We'll get it fixed up. Because I could just wait until I get it all set up, but then the everything will stagnate, and there's so many videos to go through, and I'm sure more will be produced. And yeah, this just gets me experience being in front of the camera. You may have noticed that I don't goof up things quite as badly as I did last year. So I guess if you put thousands of hours into doing this, that I make marginal improvements. A slow learner, I guess. All right, we got Roberto here, and Roberto says, curious what you'll say about how do you get your a priori objection by BB? Probably something like the same way you just don't have realist intuitions. What is that in reference to? Is it one of his recent Substack posts? So if you don't know who BB is, that's Bentham's Bulldog, which is the Substack, or Substack is just a blog platform where people host blogs. I have a blog on there, Lance Independent, and other people have blogs on there, and Bentham's newsletter is one of them. Sapir says, crazy that it's not a hot subject on the waves of the algo. I hope you're being sarcastic, because it's really not a hot topic. I mean, right now it's probably just a bunch of stuff about politics and all the chaos going on in the world. Yeah, last post by BB. Yeah. So I'm going to be going into that a bit. I didn't get to that part of the post, so I only read about a third of it, and then I just didn't get further. I am juggling like 6,000 things going on in my life right now, so it's pretty tough. Yeah, Anthony, you're rich with that Lance Loot. You got it. All right, and if it's not obvious, it's because my name is Lance. But yeah, you got the Lance Loot. All right. So, and last time we were reviewing a debate, I think it was Carnism, something or other channel. It was a debate with Connor and Pat. I might return to that if I get through talking about the blog posts. So let's get through these. Why don't we start with the latest post? Now, I should say the latest big series on my blog was a response to Bentham's newsletter. Bentham's newsletter is a blog that covers a bunch of stuff, a lot of religion, effective altruism, metaethics on occasion, and a variety of topics in philosophy. A couple of years ago, it took me a while to get to it, but a couple of years ago, there was a long post. I think it was called something like "Why Moral Realism is True." Just in the past couple months, I posted a very long series. I think it was a 6-part series of critiques and rebuttals to that. So it's very extensive. It's 6 parts, which is on my blog. It's one of the more recent things that I posted called Bentham's Blunder. And you could go check that series out. But the blog recently put out, this was October 4th, so just 3 days ago, a new sort of statement on realism. From the first, I'd say, third of it that I read, I didn't see much that was new. Maybe it was half. Let me see about how far I got into it. Oh, wow. It's a lot longer. Yeah, so I only got through like a quarter of it. I don't want to go through the whole thing, but we'll have a look at it. It is a public post. Yeah, so that shouldn't be an issue for me to show this. And anyway, it'll direct people over there. So, and if there's an issue, there's an issue. Okay, so let's do that. Now, I don't want to go through the whole blog post. I want to get to a particular. So Travis says, yeah, it was carnism debunked. So I might return to that. All right. So let me see if I could zoom in a bit. Yeah. Why I believe in objective morality. And it goes into a bit, and we're not going to go through all this. I wanted to get to a particular point in it. I've covered a lot of this stuff many, many times. So it has like a definition of realism. Let's see. What did I want to get to here? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the standard stuff that you'll see. So most of this, there's nothing new here. It's a definition of realism. It's a bit of the author's history on their position on the matter and stuff like that. And then, okay, so let's just start here, and then we'll move through it. We'll get to the point. There was a particular point that I wanted to talk about. So here it says, so in short, moral realism is the idea that there are things that you should or shouldn't do, and that this fact doesn't depend on what anyone thinks about them. Now, there are some nuances to that, but there's nothing fundamentally wrong with this characterization. So no issue with that. And so you have like, so for instance, suppose you take a baby and hit it with great force with a hammer. Moral realism says, one, you're doing something wrong, and two, that fact doesn't depend on anyone's beliefs about it. You approving of it, or the person appraising the situation approving of it, or society doesn't determine its wrongness. So that's basically what the view is all about. So where do I want to get with this? So the first issue, and this is something that I've raised with this author several times, and it occurs a lot with people arguing for moral realism, is that they'll say things like this, but lots of moral statements just really don't seem like any of these. Now, for those of you that have seen what I say about this before, you already know what I'm going to say. Seem to who? So they might seem that way to the author of the article. Like, yeah, it doesn't seem like, they just don't seem like these sorts of answers. So in other words, the sort of anti-realist answer. So if you take a statement like, it's morally permissible to, torture babies for fun, the moral realist will say, well, I would say that that's true, and that it's true in a way that's independent of anybody's goals or values. And anti-realist positions would tend to say that a statement like that is neither true or false. It's false, or it's true but stands independently. Sorry, it's true but stands dependently. So it depends on what someone thinks about it. So what Matthew says, so in other words, you get these options, right? You take the statement. It's morally permissible to torture a baby just for fun. So the moral realist says false. It's not true that that's permissible. Anti-realist, there's a variety of different anti-realist positions. So if you're a non-cognitivist and you think that moral claims aren't in the business of saying anything that could be true or false, you would say, yeah, that's neither true nor false. That's option one, as you see it. If you're an error theorist, what you think is that when people make moral claims, they're attempting to describe these stance-independent moral facts, but there are no such facts. And so all such claims are systematically false because they rely on an implicit false presupposition. It'd be kind of like if you went around saying, this action is right or wrong, and what you mean is it's approved by God or it's disapproved by God. If God doesn't exist, then nothing is approved or disapproved by God. So all such statements would be false. A way to think about this is to translate the statement into the meaning that would typically be implicit. So if you go around saying, X is wrong, and what you mean by that is X stands independently wrong, but nothing stands independently wrong, then that statement is false. And so then any sort of first order sort of standard claim like X is wrong, X is right, X is good, X is bad, if any of those claims implicitly commit one to the metaphysical thesis or the conceptual thesis of realism, that it's a stance independent fact, and there are no such facts, all of those claims are going to be false. And so you end up saying, even a statement like torturing babies for fun is permissible, you'd say, yeah, that it's wrong to say that it's permissible. That's false. So the error theorist would end up going around saying things like, hey, if someone says, yeah, you shouldn't torture babies for fun, they're saying something false. That's false that you shouldn't torture babies for fun. And realists will often balk at this. They'll react to this pretty negatively by saying, whoa, so you're saying it's not wrong? It's not morally bad? And an error theorist would say, yeah, not morally bad, not morally wrong. It's not the case that you shouldn't do it. Now, that might sound really, really horrific, but as I've talked about before many times in this channel, what the error theorist is committed to in that situation is saying, look, when someone says that, What they mean is that there's a certain metaphysical fact. That I don't think there are facts of that kind. And so technically that statement is wrong. So when the error theorist is saying something like, it's not wrong to torture babies for fun, they are not saying that it's acceptable to them, that they approve of it, that they're okay with it. It's not telling you anything about their attitudes, whether that they're any more or less okay with baby torture than the moral realist. They're just saying, technically, in everyday discourse, when people make those sorts of claims, they're committed to this false metaphysical thesis. And so, technically speaking, those claims are false. But this has no implications on their behavior. Now, when realists will say, oh, look, the error theorist does not think it's wrong to torture babies for fun, they are often leveraging what I call normative entanglement. They are entangling the metaethical position that the error theorist has taken with a normative thesis. They're implying that the error theorist is not opposed to baby torture, that they wouldn't attempt to stop baby torture, that they wouldn't vote for laws against baby torture. In other words, I'm saying baby torture so many times on this channel in the past week. I don't even know, like, is it going to come up on some YouTube review? I'm talking about how it's bad, so it shouldn't. But so you see, the issue here is that the error theorist is like, technically, the metaphysical thesis is not correct. It tells you nothing about what, because the error theorist can think this. Baby torture is repugnant. I'm against it. I want to stop it. I would vote for laws against it. I would actively strive to minimize occurrences of it. They can think all of those things, and they can have the same emotional reaction, like if you could hook them up to a machine and look at their emotional response, if you could observe their behavior. The error theorist can act in practice in a way consistent with error theory, basically exactly like the realist. They would try to stop someone from torturing babies. They do all the same things. It's just that they would say, technically, this metaphysical thesis that it's like wrong in its independent sense, that's not true. But it's still horrifying and awful, and I'm going to try to stop it just as much as the realist is. So I don't know why realists find the error theorist answer so objectionable, because all they're doing is rejecting a metaphysical thesis. It has no practical or normative implications at all. It tells you nothing about how good or bad of a person the error theorist is in some non-realist sense. It doesn't tell you anything about their conduct or their character or their behavior. And so it's really weird that realists will look at the sentence, torturing babies for fun isn't wrong, a sentence that an error theorist would affirm. And why are they so horrified by that? Why do they clutch their pearls and act shocked and balk at that and go, wow, that's so counterintuitive? What is counterintuitive about it? What seems to be happening here is that realists, and this is something philosophers do in general, it's like they are in their own minds in some sort of weird conceptual Necker cube where they're vacillating between the ordinary language version and the technical version of the position that the error theorist is taking a stance on. So what I mean by that is that in everyday discourse, take in an everyday situation, a person says something like, it's not wrong to torture babies for fun. Now, is that person making a metaethical claim or a normative claim? Probably in most instances, they're making a claim that's at least partially normative. They may also have metaethical commitments implicit in the claim, but that's telling you something about that person. Like if someone tells you, I don't think it's wrong to steal, you're probably not going to leave your wallet near that person, right? Because you're worried that they might steal from you. In everyday discourse, when a person says something like X is wrong, torturing babies is wrong, torturing babies is not wrong, when people say that sort of thing in everyday life, it doesn't just have what philosophers would be concerned with, which is the pure semantic content of the particular claim in question. It also carries various sorts of pragmatic implications. And in this particular case, there's also the semantic content of the normative stance. Now, technically speaking, when an error theorist says it's not wrong to torture babies for fun, when they say that, that is intended to only express the case that it is not the case that it stands independently wrong to torture babies for fun. That's all they're saying. They're making a purely metaethical claim. Now, you could say, okay, but that has entailments for their normative moral position. Only in an abstract and theoretical sense. It says nothing about the practical conduct, behavior, or attitudes that the error theorist is likely to take. In other words, when an error theorist says it's not morally wrong to torture babies for fun, that has no logical entailments, and it doesn't imply anything about their attitudes or behaviors when it comes to the act of torturing babies. They could be equally as opposed or more opposed than a realist, and without any inconsistency. So it just doesn't carry those implications. Yet, if in an ordinary context, a person were to say, it's not wrong to torture babies for fun, that person, that's a scary person. That's a person that there might be something seriously wrong with them. Because in ordinary contexts, a person wouldn't be using that language, it's not wrong to X, to convey their metaethical position. They would be using it to communicate something about their attitudes, their preferences, their likely behavior. It would carry implications about the person's conduct, disposition, and character. That is really, really important. And what I think is going on with realists that bulk and go, oh my gosh, the error theorist doesn't think it's wrong to torture babies for fun, is that they are conflating, they're mixing the two sentences up. They're mixing up the technical sense. It's not the case that there are, because the error theorist is saying something like, ordinary discourse is committed to the existence of stance-independent moral properties. There are no such properties. So when a person makes a claim that references the properties, technically the claim is not true. That tells you absolutely nothing about their attitude. I've already said that 100 times, but that's not what a person would typically be saying in a non-philosophical, non-technical context. They'd be saying, yeah, I'm kind of cool with it. I'm okay with it. I don't care. So those are very different things. So why do realists balk at the technical version when that's all the error theorist is committed to? I think it's because they're interpreting or implying or mistakenly thinking that the error theorist is also committed to the colloquial version of that same phrase. And that's why I say it's like a necker cube. It's like they alternate between the two and they're not able to disambiguate them. Now, I can disambiguate them, and I don't understand why realists are incapable of doing this. There is what a sentence means when you decontextualize it, isolate it from ordinary discourse, and look at it in its technical context. And then there's the sentence with all its colloquial connotations. Realists seem to object to the technical. In other words, we have like the stripped down version of the sentence and the non-stripped down version. And what realists seem to do is present the stripped down version, imply to their audience that it actually means the non-stripped down version, and then say that the stripped down version is objectionable because of the non-stripped down version. That makes no sense. It just doesn't make sense. It seems to me like critics, like the author of this article, Bentham's newsletter, are just bad at analyzing sentences. And I think this is a routine feature of the way that philosophers go about the analysis of ordinary claims. They just mix up the pragmatic features of ordinary discourse with the aspects of discourse that are sort of extracted from that. The philosophers sort of pure idealized sentence that strips away all the pragmatics. And they just mix the two up, and they import their judgments about the non-stripped down version over to the stripped down version as if it applies to it in a way that is just philosophically inappropriate. I think they're simply making an error. And so I think that the intuitions they have about these sorts of cases are just wildly misguided. And honestly, at this point, to me, it's quite obvious that they're doing something like that. And it's weird that they keep doing it. Like, it's weird that the mistake that they're making is not one of having the wrong intuitions or reasonably arriving at the same conclusion, or reasonably arriving at a mistaken conclusion by employing a good method. They are getting tripped up over and confused about the methods that they're using in a way where they're just not being careful about the way that they're thinking about language. It's really weird. And it involves some sort of methodological inattentiveness or negligence that I just find extremely baffling. So I know I said a lot about that particular line, but it's an important one. Let's have a look at the comments. Travis says, the picture of Michael Huemer with laser eyes single-handedly convinced me to become a moral realist. Well, I've seen pictures of me with laser eyes, so that should convince you to become an anti-realist. Okay, so many insight. We already got the meta-ethics inside jokes. Sophia says, it seems like I have laser eyes. So Levin says, in the same paragraph, he says, it's weird to say that moral statements are neither true nor false, but I have the exact opposite intuition. In the end, the error theories are not. It's just vibes. Yeah, that's how it feels to me. Like the method taken here is my vibes, my philosophy. My philosophy antennae are tingling. Okay, so let's have a look at the rest of this paragraph. The wrongness of slavery, the Holocaust, baby torture, stabbing people in the eye, it seems like all these things really are wrong. And this fact doesn't depend on what people think about it. So there's a couple weird things going on here. I've criticized Bentham's newsletter for this numerous times, this use of really. What is meant by really? If what that means is stance independent, it's misleading to say really. Why not just say, it seems like all these things are stance independently wrong? Well, it doesn't seem like they're stance independently wrong to me. At most, it would seem like they're stance dependently wrong. At the very least, I would say, I disapprove of these things. They're all bad, but they don't seem to me like they have stance independent features. But this use of really, I think it's a weasel word. And I think I pointed out many times why I think it's such a weasel word. I call these deceptive modifiers. I do have a blog post about this where I talk about deceptive modifiers. So you would have to disambiguate what's meant by really. If it means something like stance independent, then it's weird to not just be upfront and clear about that. If it means something else, I'd love to know what else it might be. One thing I would say is if it doesn't mean stance independent, then it's open to me as an anti-realist to ask, wait, hold up, why does the realist get to lay claim to the term really wrong? Think about it from this perspective. So first of all, realism and anti-realism might give the misleading impression that realism is the view that morality is real and anti-realism is the view that morality is not real. That's not true. Realism is a view that takes a specific stance on the nature of moral truth, specifically that moral truth is stance independent. It's not the view that morality is real, it's the view that there are moral truths and that those truths are stance independent. Anti-realism is simply the view that it is not the case that there are moral truths that are stance independent. It's not committed to anything else. So it could be the view that there are moral truths and that morality is real, but that the real morality, where there are these moral truths, are not stance independent. You can see that right there. If there's no inconsistency between an anti-realist saying, I'm an anti-realist and there are moral truths, or I'm an anti-realist and morality is real. And also, it's very weird to say morality is not real, because what is it that you're saying isn't real? Because there are moral judgments, there's moral institutions, there's moral emotions, attitudes, thoughts, practices, behaviors. Like clearly people have moral standards and values and they act on them. So if you were saying morality isn't real, are you saying people don't make moral judgments? Because that'd be absurd. Are you saying people don't have moral values? Because that would be absurd. It's only the view that it's not the case that there are stance independent moral facts. That's it. It has nothing to do with morality not being real. Now, if you're an anti-realist, you may just say, yeah, I don't think there's stance independent moral facts, and then just be agnostic on what may be the case with respect to morality. But many anti-realists, myself included, do have views about what morality is and whether it's real. Of course, I think morality is real. I just don't think it involves us like accessing stance independent facts. So of course, I think morality is real. Now, that being said, I think that only anti-realist conceptions of what morality is are defensible, and that realist conceptions of morality are totally indefensible and conceptually confused or have various sorts of problems, or at least I think they're worse than the anti-realist conceptions. So the only sense in which I think anything is good or bad or right or wrong is in an anti-realist sense. In other words, in a way consistent with anti-realism. So I think things are really right or wrong or really good or bad, like in the sense of like it actually being the case that they're good or bad or right or wrong in an anti-realist sense. So I think things are really good or bad or right or wrong. Why should we grant that only the realist conception of really is the legitimate one, that things are only really good or bad if they're good or bad in the realist sense, stance independently, and that they're not good or bad in an anti-realist sense. They're not really good or bad. So this is a weasel word because realists are helping themselves to the presumption that only their position offers a legitimate conception of what's morally right or wrong, independent of whether you endorse the position. What I mean by that is that it's like they think, look, if realism is true, then things are really wrong. If anti-realism is true, then nothing is really wrong. But anti-realists can say, no, no, no. If realism is true, things are stance independently right or wrong. But if anti-realism is true, things are or could be stance dependently right or wrong, which would be the only sense in which anything is right or wrong. So that would be the view about what's really right or wrong. Things are really right or wrong in some relativistic sense, for instance, or some constructivist sense. Realists don't own the term really. Things can be really wrong in the anti-realist sense, conditional on anti-realism being true. So there's no reason why an anti-realist at the outset of a discussion with a realist should be obliged to accept that things would only really matter or really be right or wrong if realism were true. They could say, no, the dispute isn't whether anything really matters or not. The dispute is which account of what matters is the real account, is the account of what actually matters or not. So I don't know why realists use this type of terminology. To me, it looks polemical. It looks like it looks rhetorical. It doesn't look like a sort of legitimate feature of the way that one would frame a philosophical dispute. If one were being uh, partially new, like if one weren't being presumptuous about one's position. So this does strike me as presumptuous and rhetorical, and I haven't heard a good rebuttal to this point. And so what else do we have here? And so we have this, and this fact doesn't depend on what people think about it. So, and this is something that we'll get to. Often, what some realists will imply is that if you're an anti-realist, then you think whether something is good or bad depends on what people think about it. And that's really ambiguous. It's very unclear what that would mean because it makes it sound like I think that if someone else thinks it's good to torture babies, that I think it's good for that person to torture babies. Why the hell would I think that? That's a very specific type of relativism that's called agent relativism. And in this case, that would be something like agent individual subjectivism. And that's a view according to which whether or not an action is right or wrong is determined by the standards of the agent performing the action. So if a person thinks it's okay to torture babies and then they go ahead and torture babies, it is in fact okay, or perhaps good if they think it's good for that person to torture babies. So each person becomes a sort of self-legislative moral authority on what's morally right or wrong for themselves, interestingly and ironically, in a way that is morally binding, it's normatively binding on everybody else. So if you came across somebody that said, and you see them about to torture a baby, and you're like, hey, don't do that, don't torture babies, that's wrong. They could say, They could say they approve of torture babies, so it's actually good for them to do it. And if you're an agent individual subjectivist, you would be morally obliged to go, oh, well, in that case, given that you think it's okay, it is in fact okay for you to do it. I'll just walk away. Do your thing. And this is often what critics of anti-realism will imply a realist. Realists, critics of anti-realism will imply an anti-realist is committed to or thinks that they somehow think that like everybody gets to be the authority about what's morally right or wrong for themselves, and that this would have these horrifying normative moral consequences, which it would. But the ironic thing about this is that notice what makes that so horrifying and awful. It's that if a person thinks it's okay for them to torture babies, this actually imposes normative moral standards on everybody else. They can no longer intervene. It would be wrong for them to stop the person. It's actually good for that person to torture babies, so on and so forth, in a way that is binding on and authoritative on other people, ironically, again, independent of those people's goal standards or values. So the problem with this type of agent relativism is that if someone, a person or a culture is off torturing people, you can't intervene to stop them on that view. It would actually be morally wrong for you to like stop genocides and stop murder and stop torture. And what's horrifying about the view is the normative aspect of it. So this type of agent relativism isn't really a purely metaethical position. It's a position that has normative implications that follow directly from the sort of quasi-metaethical elements. It's actually sort of just crosses the divide between the two. And the problems with it are actually normative problems. It has terrible practical implications, but those implications don't apply to appraiser relativism. So appraiser relativism holds that whether an action is right or wrong is determined by the standards of the agent evaluating the action. So if you're an appraiser relativist and you come across a person that thinks it's okay to torture, what it would mean on an appraiser relativist view would be that if that person said, it's okay for me to torture people, that would mean something like they would be saying, I approve of torturing people. And that's all that would mean. So it would be trivially true that if they said it's okay to torture, that what they mean by that is that they approve of torture. But if that's all that is, then you end up just having a purely descriptive account of moral discourse. When people say X is wrong, they mean I don't approve of X, or I don't approve of X. They say X is right, they mean I approve of X. And that has no implications for what you have to do or not do. If a person comes up and says, give me your wallet on the appraiser relativist account, and you say no, and they go, okay, but I think it's morally good for me to take your wallet. All that means is, hey, I approve of taking your wallet. Now, if someone comes up to you and just said that, again, do the translation exercise, convert the moral claim into the sort of the analysis of the moral claim. A person comes up and says, hey, give me your wallet. And you're like, no. And they're like, but I approve of taking your wallet, so give it to me. Does the fact that they approve of taking your wallet mean that you have to give them your wallet? Of course not. And so the fact that someone approves of torturing people doesn't mean you have to approve of torturing people, or that you have to approve of them torturing people. You're under no constraints to stop that person if it accords with your moral standards on appraiser relativism. So appraiser relativism just doesn't have the problem that agent relativism has of having these horrific normative moral implications. It just doesn't have them. And yet, realist critics of relativism almost always imply, at least in my experience, maybe there's a bunch of cases I don't know about, that relativism just is agent relativism. That's awfully convenient, that they go after the one that's an easy target and they don't go after the one that's a harder target. And I find that suspicious and more than a little weird, that they should know the distinction. They often do know the distinction, but they don't draw attention to it. I find that real weird. Okay, let's look at what else is here. We have this. It seems very weird to think that what makes it wrong to torture people is what someone thinks about it. Even weirder than the statements like torture is wrong are neither true nor false. I don't see why. It doesn't seem weird to me. I'm not going to get into the whole neither true nor false thing, but let's have a look at this. Now, there are all sorts of tricky ways people modify the view that moral sentences are neither true nor false to get around these counterexamples. Yeah, I still don't really want to get into this. So this is just getting into like non-cognitive stuff. So I'm not going to get into that. We'll move on. Denying objective morality is counterintuitive in a second very different way. If there are stance-independent reasons to care about things that don't depend on what you actually care about, then moral realism is almost definitely true. I mean, this is very silly. I mean, this is pretty much just constitutive of what realism would be. So it's like saying if they were divine, omnipotent beings, then theism is almost certainly true. It's a very weird thing to say. Once that anti-realist admits there are reasons to care independent of your desires, it seems those reasons should give rise to moral reasons. Maybe this is just, I see. So this is maybe just drawing a distinction between some sort of general reasons and moral reasons in particular. I don't care about that distinction. It's not very important for our purposes. Yeah, this is what I wanted to get to. So let's see where this goes. Once the anti-realist admits that there are reasons to care independent of your desires, it seems those reasons should give rise to moral reasons. If I have a reason to prevent my own suffering, it seems that suffering is bad, which gives me a moral reason to prevent it. Yeah, what does he mean by moral, and how does it give you a moral reason? What does that even mean? So there's all sorts of stuff here that's just unclear and not, it's underdeveloped. A lot of this just strikes me as pretty half-baked. But let's continue, because this is the part that made me go, oh, I want to review this. But this means that moral anti-realists must think that you can never have a reason to care about something independent, there's a typo there, independent, fix that, independent of what you actually do care about. This is crazy, as shown by the following cases. Now, before I get to the cases, let me talk about reasons. So if we come back to this paragraph, denying objective morality is counterintuitive in a second very different way if there are stance-independent reasons. In other words, reasons to care about things that don't depend on what you actually care about, the moral realism is almost definitely true. Let's just grant that if there are reasons that to care about things that don't depend on what you actually care about, then moral realism is almost definitely true. Let's just grant that for the sake of argument. I don't actually think that follows, because I think there's additional conceptual issues with thinking of morality as a distinctive normative domain. I don't think that there is a legitimate moral domain, but that's not really very important for our purposes. The issue here is this notion of reasons. So they're stance-independent reasons. This is the concept, or one of the concepts that I take most issue with in the sort of realist repertoire. So reasons, what the hell are reasons? So we use reason, the word reason, in ordinary language in all sorts of ways. So I might say, what was the reason why you did that? So sometimes reasons are causal, like what was the reason it rained? And then you'd like talk about like the rain, like water cycle and what causes rain. So there's uses of reason that are descriptive, causal. They have nothing to do with the sense of reasons being used here. The sense of reasons being used here is a normative conception of reasons. So you could call them normative reasons. So normative reasons, it's a very weird concept, and I'm not sure it's a legitimate concept. Normative reasons, at the very least, have something to do with what one ought to do, or what, it's hard to even articulate it, but what one has a reason to do. And when you ask people what that means, they'll say, well, it counts in favor of the action. What you end up getting is a host of synonyms. I've quoted Parfit on this, who just outright concedes in volume 2 of On What Matters that there's no non-synonymous way of articulating what he has in mind by reason. Now, that's because you could give sort of reductive accounts of reasons that would be consistent with anti-realism. So you could say, well, what I mean by reasons for actions are desires, or something that would promote a desire. So I could say that the reason why you should strive to be healthy, or the reason you should make more money, is because it would serve your interests or it would achieve your goals or your desires. And so you could cash reasons out exclusively in terms of something that isn't itself a reason, in terms of desires, goals, values, preferences, standards, whatever it might be. That would be some type of anti-realist conception of reasons. What I don't like with a lot of the anti-realist views that are out there is that they want to try to preserve reasons as something distinct from the like whatever these other things are that they are reduced to. Like it's like reasons are like you have reasons. Like so, okay. Sometimes they'll frame it as something like desires give you reasons to do things. So it's not really a full reduction. It's more like the reasons are associated with or can like they're I don't know. You might say that they supervene on desires or something like that. They're not really getting rid of the reasons. They'll say you have reasons and you have desires, and the reasons aren't the desires. It is that the desires give you the reasons. And so it's still an anti-realist account because everything that you have a reason to do is something that you desire to do. So your desires are what make it true that you have the reasons. And so what you don't end up with is an account of external reasons. There aren't reasons for you to do things independent of your desires. There are reasons for you to do things, but the reasons you have to do things depend on or are created or generated by your desires. And you'll even see anti-realists and realists sometimes talk in this way. They'll talk about on some anti-realist views, your desires give you reasons, or they'll even use the term generate reasons. Now, generate, it's like a power plant generating electricity. How the hell does a desire generate a reason? Like that's got to be a metaphor, right? Because if I have a factory that generates, a product, like it generates peanut butter, or a power plant generates electricity, something is like literally making another thing. So if I desire to drink, and it generates a reason, what this is some like so. Are we violating the laws of thermodynamics? Is this supposed to be something metaphysical going on, or is this some kind of metaphor? It all sounds very weird to me. And so anti-realists will sometimes get dinged by realists they'll say, hey, you anti-realists are saying that our view has these mysterious and weird properties that make it like questionable on metaphysical grounds, but you still have those properties. Now, when realists make that critique of some anti-realists, I agree with them. Yeah, so I don't like if you say there are categorical imperatives, and I say, okay, but I have problems with that. And you say, okay, but do you think that there are hypothetical imperatives? Do you think that if you have the desire, then you should do the thing? Um, and I say, yeah, you can say, okay, well, this idea that you should do the thing, it still is weird. It's still mysterious. I agree. So I don't believe in any of this stuff being irreducible. For me, there just are no reasons that one has in some way that couldn't be reduced to and cashed out fully in terms of some account that doesn't involve an appeal to reasons. In other words, I think insofar as reasons are treated as insofar as we're talking about normative reasons, I don't think that there are any irreducibly normative reasons. I don't think that there's any conception of reasons that's defensible where the reasons couldn't be eliminated entirely from your ontology and from any sort of clear and articulate description of what you're talking about that just gets rid of the reason talk. So I don't think that my desires give me reasons. I think that the term reason is just a way that you can talk about your goals, your desires, your values. That's it. It's just a way of talking. So if someone said, what's your reason for not wanting to torture babies for fun? I would say my reason is that I'm against it. I think it's gross and awful and I don't like it. So if someone said, okay, so the fact that you don't like it gives you a reason to oppose it, I think that's a very weird and artificial way that philosophers talk. No, my desires don't give me reasons. Unless you're just speaking in some non-literal or metaphorical sense. Desires don't give, I don't think there's extra reasons that float on top of my desires. No, I'm just against it. I don't need the reason talk. So if someone says, so why are you against it? It's almost like a category mistake. It's a psychological fact about me that I'm against it. I don't think I need reasons. So I'm fine with being a sort of reasons eliminativist and saying there are no normative reasons. There just aren't any. I'm also fine being a reductionist about reasons talk and saying, yeah, because sometimes people say, but then you can't even say you have reasons to do things. Yes, I can. Realists don't own language. And even if they're not realists, any irreducibly normative, any proponent of irreducibly normative reasons, they don't own the language. I can talk however the damn well I please. You can't tell me how I can talk. I could just be clear about what I mean. And sometimes I've had people say, "Oh, so you're going to speak in a misleading way?" No, because I don't grant that the way that ordinary people speak in everyday context are implicitly presupposing the realist take in the first place. So no, I'm just rejecting their technical conception of reason talk. So this talk of reasons, on my view, is literally unintelligible. It's nonsensical. It doesn't mean anything. So I think this right here the paper's already stepped in deep doo-doo. This can't go anywhere from here because this is literally nonsensical. There's no such thing as reasons that don't depend on what you actually care about. What the hell are those? It's not just like, because sometimes people will parody my view by saying, well, just because Lance doesn't get it doesn't mean it's not a thing. I'm not saying I don't get it. I'm saying in virtue of my understanding of ordinary normative discourse, talk of reasons in everyday discourse, whatever this concept is, irreducibly normative reasons, this is not a part of ordinary discourse. And if someone disagrees, they're welcome to present the evidence that it is. This is something that philosophers invented, and it is some linguistic chimera of verbal confusion. It doesn't refer to anything. It doesn't describe anything. There's no properties like this. It doesn't and couldn't mean anything. It's just mumbo jumbo. That's all it is. So there's nothing like this. So yeah, right here, anti-realists should get off the train. Anti-realists usually just grant this, and then they argue downstream of this, but if there were reasons like that, it would be metaphysically weird. No, they shouldn't grant that. They shouldn't grant, well, if there were things like that, they would be weird. They shouldn't grant they should stop right here and go, wait, what the hell are you talking about? Can you explain what you mean here? And realists can't explain what they mean here. And if anybody disagrees in the chat, find a realist that thinks that they can explain what external reasons are in the Perfidian sense, or this kind of reasons, irreducibly normative reasons. I'd love to have them on my channel to talk to me about what they think this means. Normally what happens when I talk to people about this is they'll say, well, reasons are what count in favor. In fact, I could show you the passage from Parfit. Let me pull it up. Oh no, I have a new computer and I don't know if I have the book on this computer. Dang it. I don't have it on hand. I have to go find where it is. I'm not going to try to do it in real time. All right, so I'll show you the passage, but basically there's a passage in Parfit in volume 2 where he talks about his conception of external reasons, and he says, in fact, give me 1 second. I'm sure that I've posted the quote before. I'll just look for it because it's a great quote and I love re-quoting it. Just looking for it. Where is it? See, this is why I don't like doing it in real time. Because I'm not going to find the passage. Where is that passage? Yeah, I'm not going to find it in real time. That's okay. I'll find it at another time. Or if someone knows where it is, you could let me know. All right, so let's have a look at the chat and then we'll continue with this. Akil says, what do you think of the idea that the folk have no theories? Usually that when people say, I know, you don't need a positive theory of knowledge to explain their behavior. That's exactly what I think. So the title of my dissertation is Schrodinger's Categories. And what I run on throughout the paper is this metaphor to quantum mechanics. So not a metaphor, like a comparison or an analogy to quantum mechanics. So I start off in the dissertation by saying, imagine there's people having a barbecue and they're worried that it might rain over the weekend. And so one of them says, yeah, I think it's going to rain. Maybe we should call off the barbecue. And the other is like, no, I don't think it's going to rain. We should stick with our plans. Now, when they make those claims that it is going to rain and it's not going to rain, imagine if the conversation continued and the first one said, well, hold up. I actually think that it will both rain and not rain, technically speaking, and that quantum events entail that the universe will diverge down multiple branching, like splitting branches of different universes, and then it will rain in some of the universes and it won't rain in others. And then the other one goes, no, I actually think it's random. I think that due to quantum events, once the quantum, wave function collapses, that will end up in either a universe in which it will rain or which it won't rain. In other words, like where they're making claims, those initial claims about whether it'll rain or whether it won't rain, are they implicitly committed to different views about how to interpret quantum mechanics? when they make everyday causal claims? Absolutely not. It's absurd. It's silly. People don't need to have a view on quantum mechanics to say it will rain or it won't rain, or I'm not sure if it's going to rain. They're not necessary. Michael Gill uses an example in his paper, I think it's in the paper Indeterminacy and Variability of Metaethics, where he says, look, when people talk about numbers, they don't have to be committed to mathematical Platonism or anti-Platonism. It's just he just says that it's not something that animates ordinary discourse about math. So when it comes to everyday claims like murder is wrong, I don't see any particular reason to suppose that people have to be committed to any particular realist or anti-realist account. So when you ask, like, do people just not have theories? Yeah, I think people don't have theories. So philosophers seem to think or seem to operate, I'm not saying all philosophers, but many of them seem to operate on the presumption that when we employ language, and I talked about this in the previous video, that we are implicitly committed to one or another of different philosophical theories. So like when you use words like good or bad, those words have deployment conditions that conform with one or another of different philosophical, like it doesn't have to be explicit. It's not like you learn the theory and then you go apply the theory. It's that your language could be described in terms of these theories. And so these theories are sort of extractable from and implicit in the way that you speak. So you have this sort of principled means of deploying language that conforms with moral realism or non-cognitivism or subjectivism. And I see no reason to think that that's the case, because most of that language in ordinary context, a commitment to one or another of those metaethical accounts would result in you speaking and acting exactly the same way. It doesn't make any determinable difference in your behavior. And so there's no determinate reason to think that when you say murder is wrong and then you try to stop someone from committing a murder, that this commits you to realism, for instance. Sometimes realists think, like, if you act on your values, you're demonstrating a commitment to realism. It's absolute bullshit, and they should know better, because there's nothing about being a constructivist or an arithmetic fictionalist or an expressivist that somehow bars you from acting on your moral standards. Nothing at all. And so an anti-realist can act just like a realist. There's no observable differences in their behavior other than really trivial things that they might say, like moral realism is true or non-cognitivism is true. So there might be some behavioral differences, but they are purely abstract and completely negligible and have nothing to do with people's actual behavior. So my view is, that people don't have ethical positions, like, at all. They literally just don't have them. And I just don't think people are realists or anti-realists. And I think the same for many other philosophical positions. I don't think people have views on the Gettier problem. I don't think that there's any, I don't think like people's attributions of the, or use of the term knowledge conforms with some undiscovered justified true belief plus some other thing like the use of a reliable cognitive process. No, there's no correct analysis, in part just because people just don't have implicit theories, jangling around inside of their heads, but also just that I don't think language works that way. So it's not just that, because sometimes people think that I'm saying, I don't think that there's any sort of definitive conceptual analysis of the term, and so we can't have any correct and successful conceptual analysis. I'm not just saying that. My view of language is that it's so improvisational and context dependent that our meanings are shifting and morphing to suit the conditions that we're in and suit our goals, our agendas. And so the use of language it's just not in the business of deploying theories that are relatively fixed. So even if we don't think that the terms themselves have to have fixed meanings, I don't think that our use of terms sort of gravitates even very roughly around particular theories. And I don't know why philosophers would think otherwise. And yet it seems like many do. They seem to think that there's like all these folk philosophical views. And a lot of research is dedicated to discovering what those folk philosophical views are. Folk views on free will and personal identity and consciousness. I don't think you have any of these, like any of them. And so that's why it was titled Schrodinger's Categories. What I end up saying, I use that comparison to quantum mechanics to say that people exist in a state of philosophical superposition that's only collapsed by engaging in philosophy. And what I mean by that is that they have no determinate philosophical position. It's like a Schrodinger's cat, right? So the cat is neither alive nor dead until you open the box. And so people, which position does a person have? Platonist or anti-Platonism? They don't have either view until you teach them about the distinction, and then they adopt it. Now, this has all sorts of interesting implications for experimental philosophy, for psychology, for philosophy more generally. One of the implications it may have is that I think that when philosophers appeal to, the quote unquote common sense philosophical intuitions, that this is completely absurd. There are no common sense philosophical intuitions. So there's nothing in them for them to appeal to And so one of the things that realists will often do is act like their position is the more commonsensical one. The author here, Bentham's newsletter, is saying it seems this way. Now, I, I don't think that the author simply thinks it seems that way to them. I think they think that it generally seems this way to other people. That's an empirical claim about people's psychology, and I think that that claim would be probably false. It's a little weird though. Sometimes there people that make these sorts of claims. It's dicey whether they take themselves to be making an empirical claim. If they are making an empirical claim, then they need to contend with the empirical evidence. And unfortunately, the author of this article just does not contend with that empirical evidence. Not to my knowledge, I've never seen them do so. And so, you know, but I contend with it. That's what I do. That's what I specialize in. But unfortunately, most of the people in the contemporary analytic metaethics space, even when they do make empirical claims about what non-philosophers think or feel or how things seem to them, what their phenomenology is like, or how they talk, they don't engage with the empirical evidence that on this at all. They just quote it. They don't cite it. They don't seem to know anything about it. They don't seem to care about it. It's really, really weird. They're basically doing armchair psychology and armchair linguistics and armchair anthropology, and they don't know anything about any of these subjects. They're completely lacking in any knowledge at all, and they seem hostile or totally indifferent to actually acquiring that knowledge. Sometimes even when I've offered it, I'm like, hey, here's some citations and references. You want to have a look? And people often just don't seem to care. It's real weird. There are a lot of branches of philosophy. I'm not saying all of them. Philosophers of science that know way more science stuff than me. But there are a lot of analytic philosophers that they're just all in on the rationalist enterprise, and they seem to have an active aversion to empirical evidence, even when it's relevant to the claims they're making. Now, look, I don't think you need to do a bunch of psychological research to offer an interpretation of Spinoza. Like, why would you need to do that? I mean, maybe you would. I'm just saying it's not obvious to me that you do. I'm not against the possibility. I don't think like historical work in philosophy necessarily needs to engage with empirical research. I'm not sure that philosophy of logic needs to engage with empirical work. There might be, I don't know, philosophy of art. Maybe that doesn't. Probably got to look at a lot of art. I don't know. But just my point is, like, sometimes philosophers just make claims like most people think this. That's an empirical claim. So you're going to have to contend with the empirical evidence if you're going to make a claim like that. But it's real weird when philosophers refer to stuff like non-cognitivism, like the claim that moral claims are not propositional. Is that an empirical claim? What's it a claim about? Because I take moral claims to be like a type of behavior. It's like a thing people do. Where the person's like, hey, murder is wrong. It's an event that occurs. If they're not talking about that, I don't know what the hell they're talking about. And when I've asked some philosophers, they'll give me sentences. They'll just give me a sentence. They'll be like, well, I think non-cognitivism is about sentences like murder is wrong. Okay, but who's using the sentences? Like, okay, so the sentence is propositional or not? How the hell is the sentence is a person using it to express a proposition or not? So it doesn't make it, if someone's saying the sentence, then how the hell could I possibly know what it means? And this is because I have a view of language where I don't think that sentences mean anything outside any particular context of usage. They just don't mean anything. To me, it's like describing a behavior without any context. The example I often give is someone throwing a rock. Someone throws a rock. Why? Why did they throw the rock? There's no fact in the matter because it's an abstract scenario. Why someone throws a rock depends on the actual psychology of the person that threw the rock. Did they throw it to warn someone? Did they throw it to hit somebody? Did they throw it to knock over a can because they're practicing their throwing aim? It depends on why they in fact threw the rock. So if you just say, imagine a person throws a rock, why did the person throw the rock? It's a nonsense question because it's a matter of, it's an imaginary scenario. So if you give me a sentence outside a context of usage, murder is wrong, and then you ask me, does the sentence express a realist or an anti-realist position? I think that question is literally nonsensical. Sentences don't express anything. People use sentences to express things. And this is why I go for the slogan, words don't mean things, people mean things. So, this is part of the reason why I reject all of the existing forms of anti-realism, because central to all of them, whether it's non-cognitivism, relativism, constructivism, or error theory, all turn on a semantic thesis, a thesis about what sentences mean. I don't think sentences mean anything. So I think all these positions are complete nonsense. So, take error theory. Error theory holds that moral claims express propositions, and those propositions purport to describe facts, like stanza-dependent facts. Okay, which propositions? Now, if you look at what Mackey says, it looks like an empirical claim, because Mackey will say stuff like, I intended to describe what the everyday person means. So fine, okay, so then why don't we look at the empirical evidence? And yet, they don't look at the empirical evidence. Okay. Let's see comments. Sapir says, okay, so reasons in this sense are basically as robust as qualia. Right. And this is why, I could say that I'm a normative reasons quietist. I think that this talk is just conceptually confused. And I don't think so. When they say, oh, well, Lance is just saying he doesn't understand. No, I'm saying they don't understand. I'm making a stronger claim. I'm saying they don't know what they're talking about. Sometimes people find that to be offensive. I find that weird. If I say your position is the result of a conceptual confusion, that's no more pejorative or derogatory than saying that your position is false. What matters would be why you're making the mistaken question. Because a person can arrive at a false conclusion. Like take a position that's not incoherent, but is false. Take a claim like that the earth is flat. That position is false and stupid and ridiculous and is born of ignorance, but it's not unintelligible. So the reasons why the person arrives at a false conclusion can be as much or more of an indicator of their incompetence or their other bad qualities than if they're conceptually confused. A person might be conceptually confused for a subtle, complicated, and understandable reason that they have a perfectly good excuse for. So saying that a person's position is the result of conceptual confusion is no more intrinsically negative or pejorative or insulting than saying that their position is intelligible but false. So when they make that objection, it's either they're confused or they're like, again, also taking offense to the matter. Maybe it is negative. So what? I still think I'm right. Like, it's not like I'm gonna, oh, I hurt your feelings, so I guess I was wrong then. No, if your feelings get hurt by me saying I think your position is the result of conceptual confusion, too bad. I don't know what to do about that. I mean, people complain about it, how dare you insult my feelings, and a lot of these very same people imply that me and everybody that takes my philosophical position is a psychopath and like is in favor of baby torture. So, don't throw stones from glass houses, I guess. Like maybe you should stop implying that we're evil. But again, though, like they're making a rhetorical move. I'm not even trying to make a rhetorical move. I'm trying to make a technical. I'm trying to express my technical position. And if it upsets people, that's like unfortunate, and I'd prefer that it didn't. Whereas they say pretty provocative things about anti-realists on frequent occasion, and don't, at least so far, don't seem especially responsive to me describing things like normative entanglement and saying, "Hey, can you please stop implying that we're evil psychopaths?" And yet, just yesterday, I found a tweet where a person was implying that relativists are psychopaths. Relativism doesn't entail or imply psychopathy. It's ridiculous. And yet they still say stuff like this. Mahianas Superior is responding, just polysemy about using the word reason. Yeah, some of it's just polysemy. Planecon, do you reject supervenience? Why can't reasons, facts supervene on physical facts? Let's just say, I'm not just rejecting supervenience. Let's say reason facts could supervene on like non-reason facts, whatever. What did you say there on physical facts? I mean, first, I'm not a physicalist, so that's going to be a problem for me. What are they supervening on? But the problem here isn't that I'm rejecting supervenience. It's that, well, what are the reason facts? What does that mean for there to be a reason fact? And I don't think proponents of normative reasons can explain what they mean by that. So basically, I think your options are some sort of elimination of the concept of reason. You redescribe reasons without reference to reasons, or you reduce reasons to some purely descriptive thing, where it basically you need to strip the irreducible normativity out of it. If you could cash out reasons and your use of the term reasons in purely descriptive terms, you're gold. I'm fine with that. If you can't eliminate all the normativity from your use of the term, then I think it's nonsensical. One way to put this is that basically I don't think that there are normative facts that are not descriptive facts. So I think, or another way to put this, even simpler terms, I think there are only descriptive facts. There are no normative facts. If you want to say normative facts are a type of descriptive fact, that's fine. But there are no normative facts that are not also descriptive facts. Okay, there you go. So my position on the matter is that there are no normative facts that are not descriptive facts. That's my position on the matter. Sapir says, maybe they're treating reasons like sensations. Maybe it literally is a sort of appeal to quality. There are views that, I don't know about reasons, but there are views that look at normative or evaluative claims. Sharon Hewitt-Rollett has a view that you can have sort of direct access to like goodness and badness qualia. And this is leveraged to make a case for moral realism. I haven't examined that case. I might do that at some point. I know that she's done some interviews and she's talked about this. I haven't read her book either on the matter. What is that book? I think it's the feeling of value. I'm gonna look it up. Yeah, the feeling of value, moral realism grounded in phenomenal consciousness. You see, Sapir, that's exactly addressing what you're talking about there. Put a link in the chat. So I know there's been interviews and it's a whole book. I don't have time for that right now, but I'd love to have a look at this at some point. I have seen some people talk about it positively. Oh, right. Akil says linguistic chimera, verbal confusion is everything in philosophy. Pretty much. That's pretty much my view on the matter at this point. All right. So I'm going to take a quick break, and then when I come back, I'm gonna return to these cases here. So I guess I'll leave them on the screen, and I'll be right back. All right, that was pretty quick. So just to get back into the article, here's what this is getting at. So if you're an anti-realist, then you don't think you have reasons independent of your desires. This is what Bentham's newsletter is taking issue with. And he says this. But this means that moral anti-realists must think that you can never have a reason to care about something independent of what you actually do care about. This is crazy, as shown by the following cases. So what he's trying to show is that the anti-realist is saying, hey, I don't think we have reasons to care about things independent of our own goals, interests, values. Like there are like the only reasons we have to do things are reducible to or are generated by what we care about, what we want, or by our own desires. And he thinks this view is crazy and wants to give some sort of scenarios or thought experiments to illustrate this. I guess you could call them like intuition prompts. Okay, clear on what he's trying to do here. So if he could show that that you would have a reason to do a thing that's not dependent on your own desires or values, then this would show that the anti-realist is mistaken about their not being these external reasons. And this would be a serious problem for the anti-realist. I actually agree with him about that. I think it would be a serious problem. If you could show that there's external reasons, I'll be a realist tomorrow. If not a moral realist, then at least some type of normative realist. And that would be a victory enough for moral realists. So that's good enough. At least I think it's good enough. So let's have a look at these. Okay. The first one. A person wants to eat a car. They know they get no enjoyment from it. The whole experience would be quite painful and unpleasant. A moral anti-realism, they're not being irrational. They have no reason to take a different action. So if we break this down, what the anti-realist here would be saying is that a person wants to eat a car. They know they get no enjoyment from it. The whole experience would be quite painful and unpleasant. On moral realism, they're not being irrational. They have no reason to take a different action. A lot of this is going to turn on what you mean by irrational. So if by irrational, you're cashing this out in a purely instrumentalist conception of rationality, this would be cashed out as like, they're not acting in a way inconsistent with what they want. And if that's the case, then this is just trivially true that they're not being irrational, because you're saying they want to eat a car. It's not going to benefit them in any way, but it's not the case that they're doing something that's inconsistent with what they want. Trivially true. It's like, in fact, it's stipulated that it's true that this is what they want to do. And then when we say they have no reason to take a different action, well, what would that mean? Yeah, what would their reason for taking a different action? What does that even mean? I think it doesn't mean anything. So in this case, you might have a person that has an unfortunate psychology. They have some sort of compulsion or desire to do a thing that's going to be painful and unpleasant. Now, but what's irrational about this if it's what they want? Sometimes people want to do things that they find painful and unpleasant. Now, if the person genuinely wants to do something painful and unpleasant, they have no competing desires to do otherwise. It's actually what they want, and they they're not like failing to reflect on what they would want under optimal circumstances or something like that. What's the problem here? This is a person that wants to do something that's going to be painful and unpleasant. Okay. So it just, I don't see an issue here. I don't see what's supposed to be, on his view, like totally baffling or bizarre about this. I mean, sorry, it is bizarre, but I don't see this as a scenario where I'd say, no, this person has a reason not to eat the car. What would the reason be for them to not eat the car? What is that? This isn't doing anything for me. This doesn't seem to me to illustrate anything. Sometimes people have goals that are not like our goals. I think that what's going on when realists look at this is that I don't know if they're mapping onto the scenario like what they think a typical or a sane human would do, or they're imposing their own personal values on it. In other words, I don't know if they're like thinking of some like prototypical person or prototypical agent. Now, well, typically people don't want to hurt themselves and do things that they wouldn't take any enjoyment out of. So if a person was doing that, like think about it, compared to what I was saying about the whole thing about how philosophers conflate the ordinary sense of terms and ordinary phrases people use that have all these pragmatic elements to them and all these connotations in real world social context, and how they'll conflate that with technical analogs to those sentences. So you have the exact same sentence, torturing babies is not wrong. In the colloquial sense, if a person says that, that's a scary person with dangerous normative moral views. When an error theorist says it in a technical context, they just mean some like technical metaphysical thing. There's no implications for it. It's not a scary thing at all. And realists will mix the two up and act like the error theorist is saying a horrific everyday thing. In this case, what we have is a person that they want to do something, and then we're told that they wouldn't get any enjoyment out of it. It would be painful and unpleasant. Well, okay, so what does it mean that they want? Like they're motivated to do it? So in this case, the person, if they do it, they find it painful and unpleasant. You talk to them and they're like, yeah, I'm not that concerned about pain and unpleasant experiences. It's something I really wanted to do. And I appreciate, like it satisfied my goal of doing it. Now, maybe it didn't make them happy and they don't have the goal of being happy. Now, I want to be happy. And if someone else just had no interest in their own happiness and their own enjoyment of life, and they just wanted to do things that hurt themselves, I would say this, like for a typical human, I would think that there is, there's something that's gone wrong with them on my view, but I don't think that the person is making an error. I think that something unfortunate is occurring relative to my values. I don't want people to hurt themselves. I don't want people to suffer. I want people to be happy. But those are my values. That doesn't mean that if a person doesn't want to be happy, that the person is irrational. I would just say, yeah, then that person doesn't want to be happy. And that's sad. I don't like that. I don't like when people don't want to be. I want people to want to be happy. So for me, as an anti-realist, I look at the scenario and I worry that when realists are looking at the scenario, they're imposing extra features of the psychology of the like they're sort of imposing extra features of like ordinary psychology or their own psychology onto the agent in the scenario, and imagining that the agent is somehow at cross purposes with themselves and is doing something that is like a mistake from their own point of view. But like I would be fine with that if that was what was really going on. But then the realist, I think, when they're looking at this, like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm saying even setting that aside, they're still making a mistake. So I think the realist looking at the scenario is, again, like there's this like Necker cube thing going on. They're imposing preferences, values, or goals onto the person in the scenario that they don't actually have, thinking that the person is making a mistake relative to those because what they're doing here is inconsistent with those, saying, there's something wrong going on here, and then judging that the person is making a mistake. But actually, I think that there might be these sort of like this ghost indexing that when realists are saying this person's irrational, I think that there's a sense in which they might be in some way mistakenly thinking that the person is doing something against their own interest. Now, they might not be doing that, but this is speculative psychologizing about realists in a way that's highly speculative. In other words, I think that there might be a way, there might be a sense in which it's actually realists that think like me, that think like anti-realists, and they're a sort of crypto relativist or crypto anti-realist that is thinking about this person that wants to eat a car and thinking, oh, come on, if this person thought about it more, they'd realize they don't really want to eat a car. It's not really in their interest. And then they'd realize this isn't good for me to eat a car. But the only sense in which I think it would make any sense to talk about it not being good for that person or it being irrational is if it undermined that person's goals or interests. Because imagine, and this is something that Sharon Street talks about in her paper on ideally, ideally coherent eccentrics. Imagine we had a really good explanation, right? So one thing about these intuition pumps is that in terms of their description, they're super impoverished. We don't know anything about why this person wants to eat a car. They're not able to give us like an explanation about why they want to eat a car. So there's all this context that's missing. If you knew that context, and she talks about that in the paper, that she's like, look, imagine one of these weird people, these ideally coherent eccentric people with eccentric goals and values. Imagine you gave backstory. Imagine you told a narrative that could allow you to make sense of, without changing these facts, that makes sense of why they want to eat a car, while not changing the fact that they wouldn't find it, enjoyable. They'd still find it painful and unpleasant. Once you told that narrative, you might go, okay, I see why they want to eat the car, and you might not have an issue with it. So my concern here is that I think that there's a sense in which when you give people these weird, impoverished, or sort of like underdeveloped scenarios, that people are sort of imposing or projecting certain sorts of values or goals onto the agent that are reminiscent of their own values or what they would consider typical values. They're judging the person to be making some sort of error with respect to those values. So actually, in an anti-realist sense, they are not realizing they're doing that, and they're mistakenly thinking that the person is actually irrational in some sense that's not indexed to that person having some conflict with their own values. And then going, look, this actually shows that people have reasons to do things independent of their values. But actually, it's like, no, people don't actually typically want to hurt themselves for no good reason from their own vantage point. So there's like the person is like making some error relative to their own values. I think I'm belaboring the point here. So I don't see an issue with this. Yeah, so Timothy says they could have competing desires. Right, but we just don't know because it's underspecified. Person wants to eat a car, but they also don't want to be in pain. They might wish they could eat it without pain. Right, and we don't know because we're not told that, right? So we don't know. Yeah, so there's just something about this that I think is just it's not good from the perspective of actually giving us a sense of like things here are underdeveloped. Like what's meant by irrational? What's meant by no reason? We're not told. The scenario is impoverished. I don't think this is particularly informative. A person desires at some point to procrastinate. They know it's bad for them, but they don't want to do their tasks. On anti-realism, this is not a rational feeling. All right. So a person desires at some point to procrastinate. They know it's bad for them, but they don't want to do their tasks. On anti-realism, this is not a rational feeling. It depends on what you mean by a rational feeling. So again, we have an impoverished scenario. They desire at some point to procrastinate. Does the person also want to be the kind of person that doesn't procrastinate? I don't see an issue here at all. So imagine I say a person desires at some point to eat a cookie. They know it's bad for them, but they don't want to avoid eating the cookie. On anti-realism, this is not a rational feeling. Well, it depends what you mean by a rational feeling. I would say, no, that's a rational feeling. The person has a higher order desire to eat healthy. They also have a desire to eat a cookie. The desires are in conflict with one another. On reflection, they consider the desire to be healthy as taking priority over the desire to eat the cookie, and yet they eat the cookie anyway. So I'd say it's a case of the person acting against what, by their own lights, is in their interest. And I think people may be psychologically capable of doing this. That is knowingly acting out of accord with what's in their interests. And then I would say that the person is irrational, but they're irrational with respect to what would be conducive to their goals by their own lights. So I don't see any problem with this. I would say, no, if you're clear about what you mean by this, then once you disambiguate what you mean by a rational failing, I would either say they have a rational failing, and the rational failing is a failure to act in accord with their like the values that they on reflection consider more important than their other values, or there's not a rational failing. I certainly don't think that they're making a rational failing because they're failing to do what they have a reason to do independent of their goals or desires. I don't get that out of this scenario. Now, part of the issue here, I'm talking about like higher order desires. This is all crude, almost pseudo-psychological discourse. Sometimes when realists and other philosophers talk about desires, they treat it like the anti-realist thinks that any whim or desire that you have in any given moment, like, I feel like eating chocolate, that if you have a reason to do that, and it wouldn't be irrational to do that on your view. This is ridiculous. So so some people are addicted to cigarettes and they might feel this, I really want to smoke. Do they think that an anti-realist thinks that whenever you have that's desire to smoke, that it's not irrational according to the anti-realist for you to smoke? Of course, an anti-realist wouldn't think. They could think that, but they could say, no, it's irrational in the sense that it's against what the person wants to do. The person doesn't want to be a smoker, and yet they feel like compulsion. So they can both have a desire to smoke and not have a desire to smoke. And the reason I said that this talk of desires is pseudo-psychological is because it's not like the term desire corresponds to a specific cognitive process or psychological state in the brain or the mind, and that we could point to and say, here's what the desires are. That term desire is going to crudely map onto a variety of different types of psychological processes. So when a person has that like, I want a cigarette or I want a cookie, that involves certain types of psychological processes going on. But the person also going, no, but I want to be a healthy person. I shouldn't eat the cookie. And that conflict that arises, a person can have an internal conflict between two different processes. And are they both desires? Well, the word desire just doesn't do a good job of capturing the psychological processes that actually characterize actual human psychology. And so when we're talking about rationality or irrationality, if we cash it out in terms of whether a person is doing what is or isn't in accord with their desires, that's just too crude of a discourse for capturing the actual way human agency operates. So in my view, I wouldn't call it rational to always act in terms with what you could say are your proximal or your sort of compulsive desires. So whatever you have an immediate sense that you want to do, the rational thing to do is to just do that. And if you actually think, no, maybe you shouldn't just act on every impulse, I think you should do that, and that's the rational thing to do, to not always act on every impulse. It's to reflect on and think about what kind of person you want to be, what kind of values you want to have, what kind of goals you want to have. So you yourself can think over the different psychological states you have and have some view about where you ultimately want to land. And I don't see any problem with construing rational behavior in terms of acting in accord with those. And again, this is not really mapping onto human cognition. It's not like I don't know the underlying psychological processes involved and these competing senses of desire or motivation or value. I don't know what they are. I doubt realists know. I mean, they don't care about psychology more than I do. So it's not like you're seeing a bunch of cognitive science here. But just the point is, anti-realists have all the conceptual resources available to talk about a scenario like this and say, no, the person is irrational in a sense consistent with anti-realism, or yeah, sure, the person's not, it's not a rational failing in the sense that realists think that it is, but you just have to disambiguate what's being stated here. It sounds a little silly for an anti-realist to say, hey, this person knows this is bad for them, but they do it anyway, but they're not irrational. That sounds a little weird, but if Bentham had to cash out what's being said there, it's not a rational failing. No, there was no talk of rationality in the preceding paragraphs. There was talk of reasons for doing things independent of your desires. Disambiguate this. Is this saying on anti-realism, it's not the case that the person has a reason not to procrastinate independent of their desires? Because if that's the case, then I would just say, yeah, obviously, of course, people don't have reasons to not procrastinate that are independent of their desires. In other words, looking at the scenario, whether or not this person has a reason to procrastinate or not, the only sense I could possibly make of that would be, well, is procrastinating ultimately what they want to do? Is it in their interest to procrastinate? Is it what they value? It looks like in this case, it is what they value. And so I would say, yeah, so I don't see the problem here. But you have these other problems here, like they know it's bad for them. What does that mean? Does he mean that they know that it's not the case that it's in their interests? Because then you might just be trying to force an internal contradiction on the person's views. So what if we cash it out in terms of they don't want to do it? So then we would be saying something like they know, and knowledge is a little weird way to put it. We could just directly describe the desire. We could say they desire not to procrastinate, but they do desire to procrastinate. On anti-realism, this is not a rational thing. You got a problem there, because if they both desire and don't desire in the same sense, then you're just stipulating, hey, imagine a person that has conflicting desires on a view that says that it's not irrational to act in accord with your desires. This person is doing something that's weird and messed up. Okay. And that somehow means therefore realism, therefore they have reasons to do things independent of their desires. There's just something goofy about the scenario. The scenario is not being clear about what's meant by terms like they know it's bad for them, They don't want to do their task. What's meant by want? What's meant by bad? What's meant by desires? What's meant by rational feeling? You need to get clear on what all of these terms mean. And what I'm saying here is from the very outset of this, once the author, Bentham, disambiguated what's meant by all of these things, it's either going to be a sort of trivial recapitulation of simply saying, hey, the anti-realist does not think that people have reasons to do things independent of their desires in this case, which, sure, yeah, we don't think that. Or it's going to be framed in a way where an anti-realist could say, no, I do think the person is being irrational here, but they're being irrational because it's not according with their desires. And that's not going to be a problem. So in other words, either it's going to go one way or the other. It's either the statement that he's making is not true if you disambiguate because it's actually consistent with anti-realism, or the statement is true, but in a way that trivially just recapitulates the claim that the anti-realist doesn't believe in stuff that entails realism. It's just trivial. This is trivial. It's either false or trivial. Okay. The next one. A person wants to torture themselves. They have this desire despite getting no joy from it, despite knowing the relevant facts. On anti-realists, they're not being irrational. Yeah, don't see the problem with that. So they want to do a thing, and it's not the case that they're especially concerned about getting joy or not. What's the issue here? So what if a person doesn't want to have joy, they want to do something else? People have a reason to have joy independent of whether they want to have joy. What's the reason to have joy? Again, you're going to have an issue here. Like, what exactly do you mean by joy? Do you mean by joy experiences that a person desires? Because if that's the case, then these are just like these like weird, almost like philosophical Kafka traps. Like, imagine a person. It's kind of like can God create a rock that's too heavy for him to lift? It's like saying, imagine a person has a desire to not have that which they desire. Like, you could stipulate something like that in a thought experiment, but you're just describing a person with a bizarro psychology that doesn't make any sense, and then saying therefore realism. Like, no, that doesn't work. So again, on the face of it, once you disambiguate this, it's either just going to be a non-issue for an anti-realist, or it's again going to just recapitulate the realist thing. I think what it's trying to do here, like, really, statements aren't trying to do anything. I think insofar as this is rhetorically effective, it's rhetorically effective by hoodwinking people, by tricking them. Because a person's looking at this and they're going, wait, a person that doesn't even care about being happy, there's something wrong with that person. That's an irrational person. But again, like, irrational according to what standard? Relative to what standard? Not relative to a standard. Like, everyone just has to and should care about joy. What do you mean by that? Why should they care about their joy? Now, again, if you trivially stipulate that joy just is the types of experiences that a person wants, it's like saying a person should desire that which they desire, or a person does desire what they desire. You're either going to end up saying something trivial, where it's just going to be like true by definition, or you're saying something that I wouldn't accept. People don't have to want anything in particular, independent of whether they want it. This is saying that there's some the implication here on the realist view is that it's real weird. It's that you, for whatever this might mean, you have reasons to do things, even if they don't advance your interest or goals. So you could talk to the person that's performing these actions that he's describing. In all of these scenarios so far, the person wants to procrastinate, they go ahead and they procrastinate. The person wants to torture themselves, they go ahead and torture themselves. And you talk to the person afterwards and you say, did you get what you want? And they're like, yeah. Did you fulfill your desires? Yes. And on Bentham's view, the rational thing for a person to do is to act against their interest, to do what they don't want to do and don't desire to do and are not interested in doing. That's his view of what it means to be rational. A rational person is someone that has goals and desires, but instead of acting in accord with their goals and desires, they do something else. That's his view of rationality. I'm sorry. He says that these scenarios indicate that the anti-realist views is crazy. Bentham's view is insane. He's saying, so if a person goes ahead, like, we could extract all the stuff that's going to trip people up, which is giving these specific normative considerations. He's saying, hey, imagine a person wanted to do a thing that you in the audience, you wouldn't want to do it. You wouldn't want to torture yourself. You wouldn't want to procrastinate. You wouldn't want to eat a car. You wouldn't want to do that. Why would someone have that desire? Ugh, weird desire, right? You don't desire that, but this person does desire it, and they don't even care that it's not giving them the things you, the reader, you want. So there's something wrong with this person because they don't want what you want. What the hell? Why do people? So a person is only rational if they want what you want. Why would a person only be rational if they want what you want? So he describes people that have weird preferences. They don't want what you want. They want something else. And then he says, hey, don't these people have reasons to do these things, like not procrastinate, like not eat carbs even though it's painful, like not torture themselves even though it's painful? Yeah, this is trying to smuggle in a meta-ethical view by getting you to think that the meta-ethical view has to be true because there'd be something wrong with people that have weird preferences. That is weird. And this view of rationality that realists like Bentham are pushing, this view of rationality says that the rational thing for you to do in a given scenario is to act in a way inconsistent with what would achieve your goals and desires. Again, imagine people that have weird preferences. They're not your preferences. Let's say they want to, they just want to paint everything purple. And so you find a person and they're just painting everything purple. It doesn't make them happy. It doesn't make them sad. They just want to paint things purple. It'd be really, you like on this view, that person is achieving exactly what they want. It's not what you or I want. I don't want to paint everything purple. You don't want to paint everything purple. They're doing exactly what they want and they're succeeding at it. They have goals. They're succeeding at the goals. That person's irrational. But the rational person is like, hey, I want to paint everything purple, but because there's these external reasons, these reasons that don't depend on my desires and goals, I have a reason to comply with those. So then they comply with them. And then what? They're just doing a bunch of stuff that they don't desire, that they don't want. And that's the rational person. The rational person is a person that is apparently overrides their own desires somehow. I don't even know psychologically how that's possible. How would you act out of accord with your desires? How would you comply with reasons that don't depend on what you want? How would you do that? So I only act in accord with my own goals and motivations. Like I am motivated by my desires, right? So I do what I want. I can only do what I want. So how would I respond to these reasons unless I wanted to respond to reasons that don't depend on my desires? I don't desire that. So how would I do that unless I desire that? Now, if I don't desire that, so now I'm irrational because I'm not doing what I don't want to do. This is a very weird way of like the allegedly sane, like they seriously present as sane, as the sober, sensible, normal, everyday, commonsensical view of rationality is that you shouldn't do what you want. You shouldn't act on your goals and desires. You should do a bunch of stuff, even if you don't want to. That, to me, is a profoundly bizarre conception of rationality. That the person that is doing what they should is the person that's failing at life. And the person that's succeeding at everything they want, they're irrational. So imagine a person that has values very unlike ours. They like torturing people. They want to destroy planets. They go around like vaporizing planets and torturing people. And it's exactly what they want, right? Maybe they're not happy. Maybe they're not sad. You could imagine it's like an AI that's incapable of joy and suffering. But it's just like, these are my goals. These are my goals. Destroy planets, torture people. And it's not getting any pleasure or pain out of it. Is that machine irrational? Why would it be irrational? What would that even mean? Well, it shouldn't destroy planets. Well, I don't want it to destroy planets, but it's doing exactly what it wants. So somehow doing what you want on the sensible view of rationality is irrational. I think that's ridiculous. And I think this is very, very silly. And these to me look like they're not even like intuition pumps. They're like intuition tricks. It's almost like they're duping people. That's what I think they're doing in practice. I don't think it's intentional. I just think that the author is confused and is confusing people. Okay. Oh, there's an actual cookie example. A 4-year-old wants a cookie to be shaped like a triangle. They are willing to endure great future agony for this. On anti-realism, they're not being irrational so long as they're informed about the relevant facts. Yeah, what's the problem? They just don't have the kind of desires you and I have. Don't see what's irrational about this. A person has a very strong desire to be skinny. This motivates them to starve to death, leaving behind a life of joy and fulfillment. I'm not going to engage with this one because this is going to bring up like really touchy subjects. And I think it's kind of messed up to bring this up because it's like really hardcore emotional blackmail and normative entanglement. This can be leveraged to imply that if you're an anti-realist, that you favor like self-harm or something. And I don't like that as an example. So I'm not going to engage with it. Yeah, it's the same thing here. Yeah, the self-harm stuff. So this is all just normative entanglement. This is nonsense. This is really, really, really bad argumentation. It's a bunch of misleading, ambiguous, underdeveloped, half-baked intuition pumps that are all super misleading. And then he just ends by saying, this is all completely nuts. It's all relying on trickery with language. And this looks to me like to be the bankrupt pseudo methodology that realists have because they don't have anything good. So they try to make anti-realism look stupid. And this is just a catastrophic failure. This is really bad stuff. Okay, let me even get that off the screen. I don't even want that on the screen. Okay, this is all completely nuts. We take it as a totally ordinary assumption in normal life that there are some things that aren't worth pursuing, that one is a fool to pursue. So like back to this nonsense talk that Bentham knows that I've criticized this numerous times, or at least should know, but doesn't change the talk. We take it. Okay, let me ask y'all a question in the audience. Who the fuck is we? Is it me? Because it's not me. Is it you? Let me ask you in the audience. Is it you? Are you we? Do you think this way? Let me know in the comments. Do you think this way? Do you take it as an ordinary assumption in normal life that there are some things that aren't worth pursuing, that one is a fool to pursue? Independent of your desires and goals. I don't accept that. Doesn't seem that way to me. So Bentham has a serious problem of constantly saying it seems to us, or we, or it seems that, without reference to anybody in particular. It's counterintuitive, it's intuitive. Who is it intuitive to? Who is we? There's no specification here. So who is we? That's important. Is it everybody? Is it everybody that's sane? Is it everybody that thinks correctly? Is it everybody that doesn't have brain lesions like I do? Who the fuck is we? Who is it? This is supposed to be analytic philosophy. The author heralds himself as like being good at philosophy and has posts about how to know whether you're good or bad at philosophy, and can't be precise in a very simple way. Who is we? Just can't be clear about it. They're just not clear about it. It's not me. So we take it as a totally ordinary assumption in normal life that there's some things that aren't worth pursuing, that one is a fool to pursue. Again, it's not just that the we is ambiguous, it's that the rest of the statement, we take it as an ordinary assumption in normal life that there's some things that aren't worth pursuing, that one is a fool to pursue. Now, if that's not implicitly referencing a realist conception of value, of stance-independent reasons, I agree with that. Yeah, some things aren't worth pursuing. It's not worth pursuing, joining a weird sacrificial cult. It's not worth pursuing, becoming a heroin addict. That's not a good thing to pursue. But what do I mean by that? Do I mean it's not, those aren't worth pursuing independent of your desires? No, I mean that if you pursue those courses of actions, you're typically going to end up doing things that are inconsistent with your own goals and desires. Your life's not going to go well from your own point of view. You are going to suffer by your own lights. That's what I mean. Or I could mean you're going to do things that I don't want you to do. So let's say some things aren't worth pursuing. Okay, it's not worth pursuing becoming a successful serial killer. Well, it's not because it's not going to serve your interests. It's because I don't want you to do it. So in all of these cases, when I'm talking about like a person being a fool for pursuing something, well, they're a fool in my estimation, or in their own estimation. You would be a fool to start becoming a drug addict because you are going to suffer by your own lights. You're a fool by my lights for you to become like an evil person, because I like, by fool, I just mean like you're doing something I don't want you to do. This is all trivially easy to construe in realist terms, or sorry, in anti-realist terms. This is all trivially easy to construe in terms consistent with anti-realism. And so again, you see that the realist presumptions here are under the hood. He's not being explicit here. What if he said, we take it as an ordinary assumption in normal life that there are some things that aren't worth pursuing independent of whether they are consistent with your goals and desires? Why not be clear here? Or we take it as an ordinary assumption in life that there are some things that you have reason to do independent of your desires. Why not be clear about the realist presuppositions behind the remark? So the remark, again, does this thing of making this statement that seems benign that an anti-realist could agree to were it construed in a way consistent with anti-realism, but wouldn't agree to if it were construed in a way consistent with realism. But it's not construed in a way that determinately collapses that ambiguity. And so if you get this sort of problem where if I said I agreed with this, it'd be like, so you agree with realism. No, I agree with an anti-realist construal of what this would mean. If I say I don't agree with it, it's like, so you don't think people are fools? You don't think a person would be a fool to become a drug addict? You don't think a person would be a fool to not take care of their health and die very young? No, I do think the person would be a fool. But the sense in which I think they're a fool is a completely anti-realist sense. So this is just more of this like equivocating language, this unclear, ambiguous language that tries to make it seem like, not like the anti-realist has a different view of what it would mean to be a fool. The implication here is that the anti-realist is like, yeah, people become drug addicts and they do stupid things and they commit serious crimes when they're 20 and they go to prison for the rest of their lives. Yeah, none of those people are fools. They're not making any mistakes. They're not doing anything irrational. The implication here is that the anti-realist has this completely naive, idiotic, stupid view of humanity or of agents in general that they just don't have. So this is I'm sorry, this is like, whether it's intended or not, we'll just say it's not intended. This is super misleading. This is like philosophical subterfuge, and the author should know better. And I don't think he does know better. I think he's so tripped up over language that he doesn't realize how profoundly confusing and misleading and this sort of way of talking is. Yeah, I mean, look at this next sentence. Anti-realism can't maintain that obvious intuition. What exactly is the intuition? Disambiguate. Is that previous sentence consistent with anti-realism? If it is, then the anti-realist can say, you are incorrect. We can maintain the intuition that in normal life there are things that aren't worth pursuing. Do you think I would say, yeah, there's nothing in life that's sorry, there's so many negations here. Do you think I would say in normal life there are some things that aren't worth pursuing? Of course I would. Of course I would say that. But I mean something different from them by that. Of course I would say in normal life there's things that are not worth pursuing. Of course I'd say that. So what does he mean by that? Again, it's the question of he uses all this ambiguous language. If you disambiguate, the anti-realist would either trivially say, yeah, I agree with that, or they'd say, well, no, because you're baking in the realist presumptions, which makes all of this just like veiled, like circular. Well, it's not circular reasoning, but it's all just veiled restatements of, hey, what this all comes down to in all of these ways of phrasing things are just variations of ways of implicitly smuggling in realist preconceptions and saying the problem with anti-realist is that they don't accept realism. The problem with anti-realist is that they don't accept realism. The problem with anti-realist is that they don't accept realism. That's what that sentence has to mean. For that sentence to work, to say, hey, the anti-realist rejects something obvious, that would have to be implicitly committed to some realist conception of what's meant by the whole sentence. And so why not say it? Why not make all the realist presuppositions explicit? Because then it wouldn't be so obviously ridiculous for the anti-realist to reject it. So the only way that this works rhetorically is if you make it not obvious that the realist commitment is baked into that sentence, so that then when you say, look, the anti-realist rejects this, the anti-realist looks stupid because they're rejecting it in any sense, not just in the specifically realist sense. Imagine a similar version of this. Imagine I said this. Imagine I said, I think that trees are magical. Trees are magic, spiritual beings. They have a consciousness. They have a soul. They have experiences and feelings. Now, I don't actually think that, of course, but that's a ridiculous thing to think about trees. And then I said, naturalist philosophers, they don't agree with this. They don't think trees are magic soul beings, right? And so I say, look, what a tree is it's a magic soul being. And so since naturalists don't agree that there are magic soul beings, I could then state in another sentence where I'm now making this implicit. Since I could then say, look, we take it as an ordinary assumption in life that there are trees, that trees are all around us, and that it would be ridiculous to deny the existence of trees. But naturalists deny the existence of trees. They don't think that trees are real. No, that would be insane. It makes the naturalist look like a complete moron because they're denying something obvious, that trees exist. But the naturalist is not denying that trees exist. They're denying that trees are magic soul beings. When you take that sentence, we take it as a totally ordinary assumption in life, in normal life, that there are some things that aren't worth pursuing, that one is a fool to pursue. What do you mean by that? Do you mean we take it as a totally ordinary assumption in normal life that there are some things that aren't worth pursuing and that one is a fool to pursue, independent of one's goal standards or values because there are external reasons? Then of course I'm going to reject that. But that's analogous to saying like trees are magic. So, but just not making it explicit. So if I say, hey, I think trees are magic, and then I'm going to use a sentence that say, and I think trees exist. So if you don't think trees are magic, you don't think trees exist. It's the same sort of thing here, where you're just leaving all the dubious metaphysical nonsense out of the statement, and then making it seem like in denying the statement, I'm denying it in some other sense. Like, the naturalist isn't denying trees exist. They're denying trees are magical. I'm not denying that there are some things in life that aren't worth pursuing and that one would be a fool to pursue those things. I'm denying that that's the case in a way that's exclusively realist in character. You see the trick here? The trick, again, I'm not saying the trick is intentional. The trick is to take a sentence that has both realist and anti-realist interpretations, imply that the anti-realist rejects it in both senses, which would be really stupid, when what you're actually technically committed to, but you have plausible deniability, is that you only mean it in the realist sense. And so all the anti-realist is really denying is your distinctive realist construal of the sentence. That's all they're actually doing. This is a bait and switch. It's a verbal bait and switch. It's just verbal trickery. Again, whether it's intentional or not. And this is ubiquitous in the way that Bentham frames his arguments. It's just verbal tricks. And analytic philosophers just use tons and tons of these. They're everywhere. And I think they don't realize. I don't think that they're going around going like, how can I trick people? I think they are just lost in a maze of linguistic errors and confusions and misunderstandings. And they can't find their way out of that maze. And so they keep thinking that they're making good points because they keep vacillating between ordinary language with all its pragmatic implications and technical discourse that doesn't carry them. And they just move between the two seamlessly and unthinkingly and uncritically and without noticing, and just keep equivocating on the two. So I think that's what's going on here, and I think that's really unfortunate. All right. 2 hours to talk about that. That was wild. Yeah, Keel says, it seems like someone trading off a long-term good for a short-term good. Yeah, and if a person prefers long-term goods over short-term goods, then of course the person's going to consider themselves to be irrational. Like, there's just the anti-realist controls of rationality just have no problem with this. Hey, Darren. So Darren's asking me about my definition of triviality. I don't have like a definition. I have a blog post that's going to be coming out in a bit where I talk about different senses of triviality. I'm not going to get into that now. There's a variety of them, so stay tuned for that, because I could give you a really sloppy account of what I mean by triviality now. I'll give at least one sense. So there's there's at least, and this isn't the one. I'm not going to do that one first because that'll set people off. One sense of triviality with some of these accounts is that they look like a verbal relabeling of the world. They don't like change the furniture of the world from my point of view. So if someone says, hey, this room is as it is, but hey, this room is as it is, and I'm also going to use a term to refer to some of the objects in the room. So I'm going to create a category. I'm going to stipulate there are certain things in the room I'm going to call blorf, and that's going to be like that object, and that object. Those are all the blorf objects. I'm going to call those the blorf objects. The room is exactly the same as it was before. It's just now you're calling some of the objects blorf. A lot of these conceptions of like analytic naturalist accounts just sound like that. They're just saying, hey, when we say that this is right or wrong, this just means that it promotes happiness or it decreases suffering. Okay, so you're just saying some word has some meaning. It's like saying bachelors are unmarried men. It has no practical implications. It doesn't change anything about what I would want to do or how I would see the world. It's just saying these words map onto these other words. Okay, I don't care. Like that's not interesting or important. I also think that just fails. I don't think there is any sort of way that you're going to say the correct analysis of wrong is that it means this in particular, because I think that relies on a mistaken view of how language and meaning work. But if you set that aside and you have the synthetic ones, then they could be interesting descriptive theories. You could say, hey, yeah, it turns out like moral discourse, without whether people realize it or not, moral discourse or moral judgment is geared towards promoting cooperation or something like that. There's like the Stromian Fraser account, those sorts of things. Let's just grant that that would be true. Okay, well, there's a sense in which that is telling me something about what the world is like. It's something that is like not just true as a matter of how we speak, but it's purporting to organize. It's making observations about like certain sorts of functions or like the etiology of certain sorts of claims or judgments or something like that. And that could be interesting as an empirical account of the world, but those kinds of moral facts are descriptive facts. They don't have any, like, they don't have any practical clout, oomph. They're not binding. They're not authoritative. They're not normative. They're not prescriptive. They don't say anything about what I should or shouldn't do. And so you have this inert account of moral truth that has no bearing on what I should or shouldn't do. It's just practically irrelevant. It's like if you had a theory about, I don't know, why people. No, I'm trying to think of a good theory. Yeah, okay, so it's like a big five personality theory. It's like saying, hey, I have a theory of individual differences in personality, and it includes 5 factors. Okay, doesn't tell me anything new about how I should live my life. So triviality, ordinarily, it's some things are trivial in the sense that they make no difference to what I think the world is like, and in other cases, they're trivial in the sense that whatever the facts are, they might tell me something different about the world, but that difference is a purely descriptive one that has no normative implications at all. Because there are a couple typical senses. There's also a subjective sense in which I think something it can be trivial in another sense, which is the sense that I don't care about it. It's like, oh, okay, so that's true. Now what? But non-naturalist realism is not purporting to be like that. It's not like, yeah, there's just these facts. No, there's facts about what you should do. There's facts about what you shouldn't do. It's trying to dictate how you live your life. And so it has practical value because it's trying that practical value. Unless the non-naturalist wants to abandon it, they can say, no, it's just telling me what the facts are. They're good or bad, but you don't have to do anything. That could maybe be an account that a non-naturalist realist endorses, and then it would just be trivial. So this is why I have a trilemma. I think it's going to be trivial or nonsensical or false or something. And there could be a combination there. It could be false and trivial if it were true. So this is really the problem these sorts of accounts run into. All right, so I only got through one of the articles. Wow, that was long. I just take too long to get through things. I'll just show you one briefly. I'll put it in the chat. So here's a really cool one. This is one that's actually an allegory for some of the stuff I've been talking about, like anti-realist and how, suppose that there were these stance-independent moral facts. Okay, well, I wouldn't care about them. I wouldn't comply with them anyway. Who cares? So that paper offers a really cool allegory. Let me pin it so you can find it. And go subscribe to that blog. I thought it was really cool. So go check that out. Maybe I should put a link to all the stuff I look at in the description. I'll have to end it soon because I spent way too long on that. I'll have to look at the rest of that Bentham article, and I'll probably end up writing a critique. Yeah, I think that's going to do it for me. I think I'm going to have to come back to look. I had 3 more articles to look at. Wow. And I only got through 1. That's okay. All right, everybody. So no more articles. Does anyone have any extra questions or anything for me? Darren, I guess I kind of answered your question, but just stay tuned for the blog post because I'll go into more detail on that. Questions? All right. Would anyone, I haven't done this in a while. I'm not going to do it now, but maybe the next time I stream. Is there anyone that wants to come up and talk to me? Ask me questions or share their thoughts or talk about something? Because any of you that are regulars, you would be welcome to do that. Or new people if you're in the audience, but you're not in the chat. That's cool. Happy to talk to people. Okay. All right. I didn't feel like that was productive. I wasn't happy with that one. Oh, well. All right. I'll catch y'all later then. And have a good night. I'll be back to talk about some of the others. Some of it is going to be new stuff. It's not going to be more Bentham stuff. And then everybody, catch you later.